Welcome to the Stewardship Sessions, the podcast where money meets meaning. Here, we talk about building wealth with wisdom, shaping a mindset rooted in purpose, and pursuing a mission guided by faith. I'm your host, Jason Stanley, and together we'll explore intentional living, one conversation at a time. Welcome back. So today, I thought we'd talk about kind of different personality traits that a lot of people carry, and some of them to their own detriment. And I'm guilty of this too. There's so many different things that we develop throughout our life, so many different tracks that we play or stories that we tell ourselves. And a lot of times they're born out of things that have happened to us throughout our life as children, or, that we learned in, as we were young adults, or just going through hard times. And they don't necessarily always serve us well, And so I'll give you some examples, questioning whether or not you're good enough for something, whether you're worthy of it, and that kind of thing, is one that I see fairly common. It's one that I've struggled with throughout my life, because when I was growing up, I didn't fit a mold, so to speak. And, our society likes to try to put people in molds, and everybody all looks the same, acts the same, talks the same, and does the same things. And, especially in school, in my elementary school years, I really struggled, because I had a lot of energy. I was excited to be doing things I liked, I was more tactile, where I learned better by doing than sitting and reading. I also, probably by today's standards, had ADD, which, I'll tell you is probably one of the best gifts in the world. It's not something to be ashamed of at all. But the result of that is that I had complications, with the people around me, and particularly the adults that, were helping shape my life at that time. I'll never forget, there was a school guidance counselor that in front of me and in front of my parents basically said, hey, he needs to go to Votech school and learn how to work on cars, because he'll never do anything other than be a mechanic or something like that in his life. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It was just that he said that in a derogatory way. And, so I've, in some way, that wrote itself into my subconscious, that derogatory idea of that he'll never be good enough, and it's something that I still struggle with today. And I think a lot of people do, and that leads into other things too. When you start with that idea, you start getting into the point where you're trying to please everybody, and you become very worried about what people think of you, and that kind of stuff. We live in a society where, a lot of it is, hey, look at me, because we really want people to like us. And some of that is just purely genetic, and it's hardwired into us as humans, because we are naturally, tribal people, if you will. We're, communal people. We need community. That's why people, work so hard to become part of different groups and clubs and stuff like that. And, I've often laughed about some of it, because, you look at some clubs and you go, I don't understand. Why do people want to do that? And what they're looking for is that community in which they can feel accepted into. And, and I think that's hardwired into us as humans. It's part of our biology. It's part of our survival. We need it. We need to be able to, have a community around us and be able to work with people and depend on them and that kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But where it becomes, I think, a disservice to us is when we're constantly worried about that. We're constantly trying to please everybody around us. And, we focus on the making everybody else happy at the detriment to ourselves. And so many times, and one of the easiest ways to tell if you're this kind of person is how do you react if you've tried to get a hold of somebody and they don't call you back? I'm guilty of this. In my business, I may call a client. If they don't call me back or respond pretty quickly, I'll start playing tapes in my head of, oh, they're upset. Oh, they're going to not do business with me anymore, or this or that. And it's the number of times that's actually been true is like one, 9 times out of 10, or 99.9 times out of 100. It's just that they're busy, right? But it adds a lot of anxiety in my life when I do that, because now I start worrying, and when we start to worry, our anxiety starts to increase. And when our anxiety increases, we start to lose the ability for rational thought. We run down these really bad roads in our own mind. And sometimes what we have happening between our own two ears is far worse than anything that's happening to us out in reality, And so, there's a lot of things that we deal with as humans and that are results of the way that we've grown up, or what people have said to us throughout our lives at different points that we may have been impressionable, or we needed something and we didn't receive what we thought we needed at that time. And so we start to default to these personality traits that don't serve us well, right? We had inferiority complexes where you don't feel like you're good enough or as good as other people, and that kind of thing. You have people pleasing where you're constantly trying to appease everybody around you and keep them happy, and you're constantly running and doing all this stuff, it becomes exhausting, and it takes you away from what you're really meant to do and the type of person that you're really meant to be, because now you're focusing solely on trying to take care of everything around you rather than take care of yourself. And so there are times I do think that it's necessary that you have to turn inward and care about yourself. I've often said that you can't fill into other people if you haven't filled yourself up first, right? So if you think about it, you can't pour out energy to people. You can't pour out care to people and your joy or your happiness to people if you haven't taken the time to fill yourself up with that first. But it's a struggle, It's something that I've struggled with off and on throughout my entire life. And I can have, periods of great success in an area, and a lot of stuff that I've done or accomplished, and still feel inadequate at times. And, I don't think there's an easy way necessarily to deal with it. I think it's, recognizing that you have that and working on trying to rewrite that story, rewrite those tapes that play over and over again in your head. And actually, I probably should rephrase that for today's, generation of, the MP4s that you got playing in your head, rather than tapes. Yeah, I grew up with cassette tapes, 8 tracks before that. I even had the old 45 records. And then there were CDs, and now there's MP4s and MP3s, I think, or something. I don't know. But anyway, the bottom line is we play these messages over and over in our head about different situations, about who we are, and whether or not we're good enough, or whether or not we should, whether or not people like us, or we, should deserve what we have and that kind of thing. And what that does is, like we talked about in the last episode, of considering it joy, of choosing joy in a situation. What that does is that steals joy away from you, because it takes your focus off what you do have in your life. It takes your focus off what's good about you, what you do very, very well, and it puts that focus onto your own insecurities, and it steals joy from you, and it increases your anxiety. There's a reason the Bible talks about anxiety so much and says do not be anxious so many times throughout the Bible. I mean, I forget the exact number, but it's a lot that we see that repeated. Do not be anxious of anything, and I think one of the reasons for that is because when we're in that anxious state, we're in that state because we're focused on what we believe we don't have at that point in time. Whether it's somebody's love, if you're trying to please people, whether it's, whether you don't think you're good enough, or you don't think that you should, you deserve something that you have. Maybe it's a material thing that you've achieved that you don't think you deserve. I'll never forget I've actually heard people say, we don't deserve this, or I don't belong here, and that kind of stuff. And the reality is they probably do, but something has happened throughout their life that has made them feel like that they're not worthy of those things. So there's some activities that I do in my life to try to overcome these things. Again, we have these default states that we go to oftentimes as humans, where we default into a way of thinking, we default into a mindset, we immediately run to certain things. And the reality is I am a high anxiety person. I had an event that happened in 2008 following a knee surgery where, I literally thought I thought I was dying. I thought I was having a heart attack and dying. And that kicked off a lot of panic in my life that I still deal with to this day. It's kind of like my subconscious mind became hyper aware of all the internal happenings in my body, all the internal processes and my heartbeat and all this other stuff. And it's very unnerving. It's kind of funny because I'll see people that are, like 400 pounds and walking around, and maybe they can walk at 400 pounds. Maybe they're only 300. I don't know. But you see these people that are completely unhealthy. They're walking around. They're completely oblivious to their heartbeat, but I feel every one of mine, and it causes a little bit of anxiety. Now I've learned how to control it better. And I've learned how to control the anxiety that I get around my health. And some of it has been by going and doing a bunch of testing and getting, clean bills of health around my heart and stuff like that. But there's times that, I'll wake up and, it feels like, by all accounts, I think I'm having a heart attack, even though I'm perfectly healthy cardiovascular wise and have had every test under the sun. I've had more of a cardiac workup than most, elderly heart attack and stroke sufferers, and all my tests are fine, But in that moment, whenever I'm going through that, it's hard to get yourself out of that state. It's really difficult because you default to what I would call the primal mind, right? And when your primal mind takes over, it's that fight or flight type of situation. And we can put ourselves in that state with so many different things. That's my case, right? It's something that's called somatic symptom awareness in my case. Basically where you start to become very aware of what's happening in your body and you associate it with symptoms that are life-threatening. And, I've done a lot of different stuff over the years to try to get control of it. I don't think that it was interesting because I went from never being afraid of anything. I did a couple of years of combat and, I fly airplanes and that kind of stuff. And so I've never really been afraid of stuff. I went through a period where I was afraid of everything from that instance, and that was a one-time deal that was a real big shock to my system that I went through that triggered that response, and that it's had a lasting response in my body. But even on more subtle levels, a lot of times we can go through something that, when we look back, we don't think it was that traumatic, but to us at that time, it was traumatic. Maybe it was something somebody said to you or how somebody reacted to you. And you felt let down, or you felt like they made you feel beneath them or something like that. And it cut you, and it programmed. It started to program your subconscious mind. And so you started seeking that validation with other people in all kinds of different ways, right? And a lot of times to your own detriment, right? And so, again, we're covering a lot of different, kind of personality traits, disorders, if you will. But I think it's something that most people struggle with in some form in their life, right? I've not met anybody that doesn't struggle with something in their life like that. And it doesn't have a track that they play that leads them down a road that is increases their anxiety. It makes them frustrated. It makes them worried, and that kind of stuff. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this. It's something that's very real. I've dealt with it on many levels in my life. And I tend to be a high anxious type person. It's not like I have it all together and I'm so calm, cool, and collective all the time. Quite the opposite. And I'll roll through like worst case scenarios in my mind, whether it's around my kids. My kid's late getting home from, wherever he's been for the evening or something like that. I'll immediately roll into what if he got in a car accident or something like that, and my anxiety starts to increase and that kind of stuff. When it's very simple, all I have to do is pick up the phone and call him, right? In today's world, we're highly connected. And I think that's a fairly common human trait that we see across a lot of people, where we have these things that we worry about that have never even happened. We play scenarios out in our mind that never actually take place. We'll have arguments in our head with people that, well, when I see them, I'm going to say, and, we play out these things that never actually take place, and all they do is increase our own anxiety and increase our own negative emotions, so to speak. And so what can you do with it? How do you get control of these kinds of things? All I can do is tell you what I've done, and tell you what I have found that works for me in my life. Everything from, I've done everything in my life from vitamin supplements to behavior type therapy to hypnosis and that kind of stuff. And I would tell you that it's something that I have to continually do and implement and work on in order to stay ahead of it, because it is something that spirals out of control very quickly for me in my life. And so, like one of the things I love, I've really enjoyed doing, and in fact, I was just talking about this a little bit earlier, was, at night when I go to bed, usually Monday through Friday I'll do this, or Monday through Thursday. I don't do it all the time, but, I have different hypnosis tracks that I'll listen to. And hypnosis is actually really good. Whether you believe in it or not, there's some decent amount of evidence that it is effective. And so, I'll work through that. And it's interesting sometimes especially if I do one on anxiety or something like that, I might actually have a little bit more anxiety the next day after doing it than you would think that you would have. But it has to do with the fact that you're digging into those emotions, digging into those triggers, and your body and your subconscious mind is starting to work it out. So I do like the hypnosis tracks. I do think that around anxiety and stuff like that, there's a lot of different vitamins and supplements that you can take that help quiet down some of your nervous system, depending on what it is. I've been a big believer in that stuff for a long time. I've used a lot of it, nothing crazy, but just natural vitamins and supplements that help just kind of calm my nervous system down and kind of quiet the brain a little bit. I'm not a big proponent. I know there's a lot of people out there that swear by using, marijuana products and stuff like that for anxiety. I'm not a big proponent of that. I think that there's a lot of other side effects to that aren't as good as what people make it out to be. But if that's you, that's up to you. I'm not here to tell you what to do and not do. It's just not for me, and so, and then also too, being physically active. Exercise is a great release of anxiety and tension in the body. It's not just about making yourself healthy. It's a way of getting out some of the tension that we carry. And I think a lot of it is we live in a society now that is pretty sedentary, right? Most people are not manual laborers anymore. Most people are, doing things that require more brain power than they require muscle power. And so we're not getting a lot of the energy expenditure that we have in the past. If we look back when most of the population in the United States was agricultural workers, you might have had anxiety, have been worried, but you worked yourself so much that you were so exhausted you couldn't think about it. And there's something to be said for that, So I do think that physical activity is a great way to reset your nervous system and reset your mind, right? Because when you exercise, you're getting the release of endorphins and different chemicals in the brain that make you feel better. And when you feel better, your focus can be in a different place, and you can actually refocus a lot of what you think. Some of the activities that I'll do, I swim laps, I run on a regular basis, I lift weights, and I box. Boxing's a great one. If you're angry, or you're frustrated, that's a good way to get some frustration out. But, at the end of the day, I think you have to start looking at what can you start to implement into your life rather than living in those states all the time. And if you're, worried about trying to please everybody around you, right? It's easy to say, oh, well, you can't please everybody. That's an easy thing to say. You can't make everybody happy. That's easy to say. It's hard to put into practice. It's hard to be in a position where you're okay with somebody being upset with you, or you're okay with somebody not being happy with the activities that you've done. That's a hard place to be. And so I think, in order to be able to get there, what you have to be able to do is shift your focus into, to that person, say, what is it about them that is allowing them to be in that state, right? So you're moving it outside of yourself instead of saying, what is it about me that they're not happy with, right? Maybe it's that they're not happy with themselves. So I think it's in dealing with these kinds of issues around, anxiety, panic, and people pleasing, or not feeling good enough, or inferiority complex. I have a hard time saying that word, by the way. I think it's a lot of it is there's not just one way to correct it. There's not just one way to fix it. I think it's a culmination of a lot of different activities that you can bring into your life, between being physically active, the foods that you eat, the supplements that you take, and the activities you do, whether it's hypnosis or meditation or prayer, or whatever it is that you can do to start to refocus how you look at that situation, how you look at that person, and refocus on, what you can control in your body to lower that anxiety. There's a lot of health ramifications, to anxiety, right? When you're anxious, your blood pressure is going up, your heart rate's going up, and those things aren't necessarily all that good for you. So there's a lot of health benefits to starting to learn how to control those things. Again, I've had terrific success, doing hypnosis and physical exercise and those kinds of things as a way to control anxiety and worry. And I think anxiety and worry oftentimes really kind of go hand in hand with being a motivated individual, being somebody that's got a lot of ambition and has a lot of goals and really is pushing yourself. And it's easy. I think it's easier for high capacity individuals to fall into those states, and actually, if you're familiar with Dunning-Kruger, it turns out that stupid people don't realize that they're stupid, but smart people think that they're stupid, which is an interesting paradox, if you will. And so, a lot of times that's a really good sign of intelligence, is when you realize you don't know everything and you feel like you're dumb. You might actually be pretty intelligent, but from everything that I've read, generally higher intelligent people do struggle more with anxieties and those kind of social disorders, if you will, because they look at every little detail, and in my life, what some of this has made me good at, though, is very good at reading people, because we don't realize that we're constantly picking up on subtle cues of people's body language and behaviors and stuff like that. And people who tend to be highly attuned to it, or people that are people pleasers, are very attuned to how people hold themselves and little subtle cues that most people miss. And that can be a really good tool, especially if you're in business. It's a great tool to be able to read people and see what they're thinking. The problem comes is when you start to internalize that and you see that as something that is wrong with you, and you're not going to make that you need to somehow appease that person. And so, I would say that a lot of the anxieties that we deal with as humans, a lot of the worries that we have as humans, can actually be good things for us too, But it's learning how to balance those things out, learning how to balance those traits out. I'll give you an example. My business partner and I, we're getting ready to go through, some big changes in our organization. And it's one that we have to kind of go out and sell to our organization, get them on board. And there's some anxiety around that because, we worked hard to build this, and we care about the people that are with us and that kind of stuff. And so if they don't want to be a part of that next stage, there's some anxiety around that, or there has been in the past. And one of the ways that we changed the way that we looked at that was to say, look, not everybody's going to see it, and that's okay if they don't see it. And if it's not for them, that's fine, but we still have to be able to do what we think is right and best for the organization. And so by shifting the way that we looked at that, it started shifting the way that we started dealing with people, and stopped being less about trying to sell something and more about a cooperative way of communicating, of let's help each other and let's do this. And so again, yeah, I think you can, situations like that, I think you can go from, trying to appease everybody and trying to make everybody happy to kind of shifting your focus a little bit and saying, all right, look, not everybody's going to understand what I'm trying to do. Not everybody's going to appreciate what I do. I'm going to do these activities regardless because I do them because I enjoy them, not because I'm doing them for other people's enjoyment or other people's pleasure or other people's happiness. And, I think helping people is a wonderful way to quiet down anxiety, right? If you can go out and do things for people, not because you're trying to seek their approval, but just do them for yourself. Going out and giving of your time or giving of your resources is a great way to, feel really good internally about who you are and that kind of stuff. And, make it an exercise where you do it and you don't seek notoriety on it. Because when you seek the notoriety, I think you probably can fall back into that state of trying to please everybody, right? And so, but again, if you're trying to please people, I think it still makes you really good at being able to read people. I think it makes you very good at being able to pick up on subtle cues in people's behavior, to be able to read a situation and be able to control an outcome a lot better. And so, most everything that we have in our lives has positives and minuses, right? There's whether even the supplements that I take, right? There's pros and cons to everything. There's side effects to everything. And I think the same thing is with our own, anxiety, our own personality traits that we carry. There's pros and cons to it. Like I said earlier, I said ADD is probably one of the best traits that I have, because when I'm interested in something, I can hyper focus on it. And if you know anything about people who truly have ADD, and you know about hyperfocus, when you focus on something, you can devour information and learn way more than what most people are going to take the time to learn and not realize that you're doing it. It just becomes obsessive of sorts, and that can make you really, really good at things. It can also be a detractor if you allow it to be a detractor. It can also make you absent-minded at times. And so, figuring out what your personality allows you to be good at. We talked about this a couple episodes ago, right? As figure out what you're good at, figure out what you're not good at. It's not that you have to overhaul your entire life and make yourself good at everything. You can't do that. Nobody is. Nobody's able to be good at everything, right? Figure out what you're really good at, focus on that, use that to your advantage. And so in what we're talking about here, take those things that you see as being problems in your life and use them to your advantage. If you struggle with feeling like you're good enough, looking at it from the angle of, it probably makes you a lot more humble than other people, in some ways, right? But you're absolutely good enough for, you're good enough to be the person that you are and that kind of stuff. And so finding a way to recenter that, keep yourself humble, because you don't want to be the person that's full of pride and out there boasting all the time, right? And a lot of times when people feel like they're not good enough, that's what they do. And it really rubs people the wrong way, is when you feel like you're not good enough. And I've done this in my own life, especially early on in my career, when I was, scratching and claw my way to success. I did that. I was very, look what I have. Look at this. Look at that. I'm doing this. Or, you start name dropping, and everybody's seen these people that do it. I mean, they're all over social media, for God's sakes, And that's really not the kind of person you want to be either, because that's just overcompensating. And, so finding ways to be content with who you have, and finding a way, being content with who you are, rather, and finding ways to, enjoy where you're at in that moment, I think centers you, allows you to be more calm, more quiet. There's a lot of different things that I am constantly working on in my life to improve. Being quiet and just listening, rather than when somebody tells me a story, trying to offer up a comparative story, is just listening to them. And, interestingly enough, people like you a lot more when you just listen, than when you're trying to talk them into liking you, kind of thing. And so a lot of times the way that we can compensate for these different personality traits that we have really put us at a disadvantage to what we're really seeking, right? If you're somebody who's trying to please people, you're seeking that validation from them. And a lot of times, in order to get that validation, what you're doing is you're trying to explain yourself. You over-explain, you overdo things and that kind of stuff. And instead, just sitting and being quiet and listening. And suddenly you'll find that people like you a lot more, because people like people who listen to them, and that kind of stuff. And you don't have to do as many actions as you thought you had to do to make that person happy. So you're actually getting the validation that you want, right? You're just going about it a different way. And a lot of times these personality traits that we have, again, we start to do actions to validate ourselves to other people or to ourselves and that kind of stuff. And when we do those actions, we're actually getting the opposite of what we hope to get from it. We're actually getting what we don't want from it, right? Because if you've ever been in a social event and somebody is just talking over you all the time, and they're constantly trying to prove their worth to you, and they're bragging about how much they spent on something. I've run into tons of these people, especially in my line of work, where they'll, one of the funniest stories was I had a guy in my office pull out a wad of cash, as if he was trying to brag about how much money he had on him at any given time. And you look at that as being annoying, but we do that a lot. As humans, we'll do activities like that because we're seeking that external validation on something. We're, seeking something that we don't feel like we're getting. And so we overcompensate. And when we start to overcompensate for our insecurities, we actually end up turning people off, and so if you feel like you're not good enough and you're trying to prove that you are, you're probably going to create the idea in most other people's mind that you are not good enough. And you're going to kind of feed that back to yourself. Whereas if you learned how just to be quiet and, if somebody says, oh, do you have this or have you done this? And you just simply say, yes, I have. And then let it go back or switch the conversation back to them. Suddenly your approval rating in their minds have gone up significantly. So again, I think that these personality traits that we carry and different anxieties that people struggle with oftentimes can be good things too, if channeled in the right direction, And so often we look at our lives as, oh, I'm broken and therefore I have to fix this. And I would say that you're not broken. We're just not always acting we're not always acting out in the right way to get what we're actually looking for. We're not broken because we have anxiety. We're not broken because we struggle with, concerns around our health and stuff like that. It may actually make you better, in my life, because I worry about health and stuff like that, because I've struggled with that. And, I've had the what I told you it was called somatic symptom awareness, where I've had these massive panic attacks where I think I'm having a heart attack. The positive outcome of that is I've done a ton of research on health and wellness. I've read tons of studies on different supplements and vitamins and medicines and stuff like that. I've read a lot around physical fitness and that kind of stuff. Because again, I do have that ADD. So when I get hyper focused on something, I can learn a lot about it. And so, that's a positive outcome because it's actually helped make me healthier than what I may have been otherwise. Where it becomes detrimental is if I allow that then to start to feed back into a loop where I'm constantly staying worried and I don't feel like anything that I'm doing is going to work. Then I would be in a worse situation. And so, if you worried about pleasing people, if you're worried about being good enough, or you're worried about whatever it is, again, there's probably a positive outcome of that if you refocus the situation and focus on changing your behavior around it. I think you'll find that you probably get more from it than the anxiety that it's causing you. Again, simple things that we can try to implement. But I do think that, learning a little bit about your health, the chemical makeup in our bodies, helps us understand why we get some of the feelings that we get. Going back and being honest with yourself and thinking about your past and looking at, who said something to you that kind of put you in that state that now you play that over and over again. Maybe it wasn't somebody that said something to you. Maybe it was just a situation that you went through. I can tell you the exact time and place when I started with the panic disorder stuff. I can tell you exactly how it happened. I know full well when it happened. And I know what that triggering event was. And so since I know what that triggering event is, I can now control it better, right? But it took going back and looking at it and saying, all right, this is why I am this way, and that kind of stuff. But again, I don't see these things as being broken. I don't see them as being weaknesses. I see them as things that can make you better and more powerful if used in the right manner, and make you, like in my case, make me healthier, give me the ability to hyper focus on things, give me the ability to manage a lot of tasks all at once and kind of think through very rapidly how to handle situations. That's been one of the benefits of having ADD, being worried about whether or not I'm good enough in other people's eyes, or trying to please other people, changing the way that I deal with people to being very reserved about who I am and what I have. And the more reserved I get, it's interesting, the more people respond positive to me, because now I'm not talking about myself. I'm not talking about my achievements or my stuff. I'm listening to them talk about theirs. And people love talking about themselves. And when you let them talk about themselves, they really like you, And so, again, I think a lot of these things can turn into what I would call superpowers if you use them in the right way. So, don't think of yourself as broken. Think of yourself as having a superpower. And if you change the way that you're using it, it probably works out very well, So those are my thoughts around that. I figured I'd share that with you. It's a little bit more intimate. It's not something I talk about a whole lot, but I think it is something that a lot of people struggle with. I've been ever amazed. The more open I am about it, the more I realize that a lot of people struggle with these different things. And sometimes it's not just one thing. Sometimes it's a couple different things, like what I've described. But again, I think that they are things that actually can be useful to you in your life. They don't have to be a detriment to you. So again, it's not about being broken and having to fix something. It's about understanding how you can use something to your advantage, to make you better than, the people around you. So anyway, all right. Well, I'll let you guys get back to your day. Hope you have a wonderful day. And we'll catch up with you guys soon.